I still remember the day she said it. Her hand, small, trembling, impossibly cold, closed around mine during the chemotherapy session. I had seen hundreds of patients pass through that room, each one carrying a private storm behind the quiet acceptance on their faces, but her eyes, hers carried something different, a truth she had held inside for too long. The infusion machine hummed softly beside us, the sterile smell of disinfectant filling the air. She looked at her wrist, then at the floor, then finally at me, as if searching for permission she had never given herself. "Doctor," she whispered. Her voice was weak, but it carried more weight than anything I had heard that entire week. I pretended to be fine for my family, every day, every single day, but the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified from the moment I opened my eyes in the morning to the moment I tried to sleep at night. I felt the words hit me before I fully processed them. Fear, the one symptom we treat the least, yet the one that consumes them the most. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening as if forcing the truth through years of silence. "Please," she said, her grip tightening around my fingers. "Tell them I fought as hard as I could." There are moments in a doctor's career when time appears to slow, not because of tragedy, not even because of loss, but because something pure and unbearably human crosses the space between two people. This was one of those moments. Her honesty cut through everything familiar in that clinic: the scent of saline, the rhythmic clicking of IV pumps, the blue gloves on my hands. It all felt distant. I wasn't a doctor for a moment. I was simply a witness. I wanted to answer her, to say something comforting, something wise, anything, but I couldn't. Not a single word came out. The truth she had carried alone for so long now sat between us like a fragile object I didn't dare touch. She looked at the window where the late afternoon sunlight spilled into the room. "They think I'm strong," she whispered, "but I'm tired of pretending." I nodded, finally finding my voice. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said quietly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one filled with sadness, relief, and a kind of exhausted courage I have only seen a handful of times in my life. I stayed beside her longer than I was technically allowed. I don't regret it. Because that day, for the first time, she let someone see the truth behind her battle. And I knew that truth would follow me long after she left that room. The next morning, I found myself walking toward the chemotherapy ward earlier than usual. I told myself it was routine, just another day in a long line of identical days. But the truth is, I wanted to see her. Something about her confession had stayed with me overnight, lingering in my mind long after I had left the hospital. When I entered the room, she was already seated in the reclining chair, blanket over her lap, eyes fixed on the window. She didn't notice me right away. There was a softness in her expression, the kind that only appears when a person has said something important the day before and is wondering whether they regret it. "Good morning," I said gently. She turned, and a small, polite smile appeared, one of those patients give when trying to hide discomfort. But this time, I could see past it. "You look tired," she said. "So do you." Her smile deepened, this time a little more genuine. I checked her chart, her vitals, the IV line. My hands moved with the practiced routine of someone who has done this thousands of times, but my eyes kept returning to her face. "About yesterday," she began. "You don't owe me any apologies," I interrupted. She breathed out slowly, as if relieved. I've been pretending for so long that honesty feels strange, like I'm breaking some unspoken rule. She shifted slightly, wincing as the needle tugged at her skin. I adjusted the tape carefully. My daughter thinks I'm the strongest woman in the world. My husband refuses to let me see him cry. And my mother prays every night, telling everyone I'm improving because she can't handle the idea of losing another child. Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking. I can't tell them I'm scared. I can't let them see it. They need to believe I'll survive, and I don't want to take that hope away from them. I sat down beside her, lowering myself so our eyes were level. Hope doesn't disappear when you tell the truth. It just becomes real. She blinked, and a tear escaped before she could wipe it away. But real hope hurts more, she whispered. I didn't argue. She was right. The most honest kind of hope comes with grief woven into it. And yet it's the only kind that doesn't shatter when life turns in the wrong direction. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow across the linoleum floor. She reached for her cup of water with a trembling hand, and I steadied it for her. "Doctor," she said quietly, "do you ever get scared?" Her question caught me off guard. Doctors aren't supposed to talk about fear. Not theirs, anyway. But she had shared her truth with me. The least I could do was give her mine. "Yes," I said simply. "More often than you'd imagine." She closed her eyes, and I saw her shoulders loosen just a little, as if knowing she wasn't the only one afraid made the air easier for her to breathe. Before I could say anything else, the infusion pump beeped, signaling the next step in her treatment. I stood, adjusting the flow rate, but her words from yesterday still echoed in my mind. Tell them I fought as hard as I could. Her battle was far from over, and so was the truth she still needed to share.
For a moment, a cold wave passed through me. In oncology, an empty chair is never just an empty chair. It can mean a setback, a complication, or something far worse. I checked the schedule, holding my breath longer than I should have, until I saw her name written in the afternoon slot. Relief washed over me, quiet but deep. When she finally arrived, she moved slower than usual. Her steps were small, deliberate, as though each inch forward cost her more strength than she wanted to admit. She sat carefully, exhaling with a fatigue that was impossible to hide. "Rough morning?" I asked. She nodded, the kind where your legs stop listening to you. I adjusted her blanket, checked the IV, and noticed how thin her wrist had become. Fragile, almost delicate. But her eyes, those still had life in them, even if dimmer than before. "I've been thinking about what you said," she murmured. "About fear?" "Yes," she looked down at her hands, "but not my fear, theirs." I waited. She took a slow breath. "My husband refuses to believe anything could go wrong. He keeps telling me to make plans for next year, vacations, projects, birthdays. I want to believe him, I really do, but every time he talks like that, I feel like I'm breaking inside." "Because you think you might not be there?" I said quietly. She nodded, a tear catching the light before she brushed it away with frustration. "My daughter asked me yesterday if I would be at her graduation. She said it with such innocence, such certainty." Her voice cracked. "I told her I wouldn't miss it for the world." I felt something inside me tighten. This was the weight most patients carried alone, the pressure to protect the people they loved more than they protected themselves. She continued, voice shaking despite her effort to steady it. "I'm not afraid to die, not really. What scares me most is leaving them with questions, with things unsaid." I reached for her chart, not because I needed it, but because sometimes a doctor needs a second to gather himself. "What things?" I asked. "All the things I hid," she whispered. "The nights I cried quietly in the bathroom so they wouldn't hear. The mornings I rehearsed a smile in the mirror. The moments I wanted to collapse but stood up anyway so they wouldn't worry." Her hands twisted in the blanket. "They think I'm strong because I never showed them the truth." "And now?" I asked gently. "Now, I'm afraid it's too late to tell them." I shook my head. It's never too late for truth. She looked at me with a sadness so profound I felt it like a shadow settling over my own chest. "But if I say it," she whispered, "they'll finally realize I might not win this battle, and I can't stand the thought of watching hope disappear from their faces." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The ward around us hummed with routine. Nurses walking, pumps beeping, carts rolling, but our corner of the room felt suspended in a moment heavier than the rest. Finally, she turned to me. "Doctor, if things get worse, will you be the one to tell them? Will you be the one to explain that I never stopped fighting?" Her eyes, tired, scared, but fiercely human, met mine. "I don't want them to think I gave up." I swallowed, feeling the weight of her request settle onto my shoulders like a vow. "I will tell them," I said, "every word." She leaned back, closing her eyes, a quiet relief softening her expression. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't asking me to save her. She was asking me to protect the truth she had never been brave enough to share. Her husband was pushing her, wearing a brave smile stretched too tightly across his face. Her daughter followed behind them, clutching a notebook against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I could tell, just by the way they walked, that the family was beginning to understand what she had been hiding all along. When she looked at me, her eyes apologized before her mouth said a word. "I couldn't walk today," she whispered. "My legs didn't want to try." Her husband's voice trembled with forced optimism. "It's just a weekday, doctor. Tomorrow she'll be up again. You'll see." His denial was loud enough to fill the whole ward. Her daughter took a step forward. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You promised you'd tell me if something felt wrong." I saw the panic flicker in the patient's eyes, caught between her truth and the expectations she had built for her family. She took her daughter's hand and squeezed it. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said with a practiced softness. "Just tired." But I could see her fingers trembling. When her family stepped aside to fill out paperwork, she leaned toward me, her voice barely audible. "I hate lying," she said, "but I can't break them, not yet." "Your honesty won't break them," I replied. "It will prepare them." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then why does it feel like I'm holding a door shut with my bare hands?" I didn't answer. The truth was too complex to fit into the space between us. We began the session. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale, her pulse weaker than the week before. At one point, she opened her eyes wide and whispered, "Doctor, I don't know how much longer I can pretend." "Then stop pretending," I said gently. She shook her head. "No, not while they're watching." Halfway through the infusion, her daughter approached, hesitant. "Doctor," she asked softly, "is my mom getting worse?" The girl's eyes were bright with fear, but her voice remained steady, like someone trying to hold on to adulthood while heartbreak pulled at her from underneath. Her mother heard the question, and something inside her cracked. Her face crumbled, her body shaken with silent sobs. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide it, trying to control it. But this time, the truth refused to stay buried. Her daughter froze. "Mom?" "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears she could no longer restrain. "I'm so sorry." Her husband rushed to her side, confusion fighting the denial still carved into his expression. "Why are you apologizing?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The guilt, the fear, the burden of holding everyone else up for so long, it all crashed over her at once. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to be strong right now. Not in front of them, not anymore." Her daughter knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her mother's trembling frame. "Mom," she whispered, voice breaking, "you don't have to protect us. We just want you." Those words, simple, raw, unfiltered, cut through the room more sharply than any diagnosis ever could. And for the first time since her treatment began, she let herself collapse into their arms, not as a warrior or a protector, but simply as a woman who was exhausted, as a human being who had carried her fears alone for far too long. I stepped back, giving them space, feeling the weight of her journey press against my own chest. This was the day her strength broke, but it was also the day her truth finally began to heal the people she loved.
Instead, I received a message from the palliative care unit asking me to visit her room. I paused when I read her name. Even though I'd been expecting this turn, it still struck me with the quiet heaviness reserved for moments we can foresee but never truly prepare for. Her room was dim, lit by a single lamp in the corner. The air was warmer than the chemotherapy ward, softer somehow, less clinical, more like a resting place than a battlefield. She lay propped up by pillows, thinner than ever, her breathing slow but peaceful. Her husband sat beside her, holding her hand, with the same desperate gentleness I'd seen many times from loved ones who feel the end approaching. Her daughter sat at the foot of the bed, her notebook closed, untouched. When she noticed me, she smiled, a fragile curve of the lips, but real. "Doctor, you came." "Of course," I said, taking the seat beside her. "How are you feeling?" She let out a tiny breath that might have been a laugh, like everything is both heavy and light at the same time. Her husband wiped his eyes quickly, trying not to let her see. She reached out and touched my wrist with surprising strength. "I need to talk to them," she whispered, "but I don't know where to start." "You start with the truth," I said softly, "and the truth is that you love them more than anything." She nodded, swallowing. Her daughter moved closer, gently placing a hand on her mother's leg. "Mom," she whispered, "we're here. You can tell us anything." The patient took a slow breath, shaking slightly with the effort. "I've been so afraid," she began, "not of dying, but of hurting you. I thought that if I pretended to be strong, I could protect you from the pain. But all I did was hide from the people I love the most." Her husband leaned forward, tears escaping despite his attempt to stay composed. "We knew, love. We just didn't want to force you to say it." She looked at them, her eyes glistening. "I don't want you to remember me as someone who fought alone. I want you to know I was scared and tired and human, and that every smile I forced was because I didn't want to take your hope away." Her daughter broke into tears, covering her mouth. "Mom, you never had to pretend for us." "I know," she whispered, voice trembling, "but I didn't know how to stop." Her husband pressed her hand to his lips. "You don't have to say more." But she shook her head, determined. "Doctor," she said, turning to me, "tell them what I told you. Tell them I fought with everything I had." I nodded slowly. "They already know. They saw it every day." She exhaled, relieved, as if she had been holding that breath for months. Then she said the words that left the room in absolute silence. "I'm not afraid anymore." Her daughter looked up through tears. "Why not?" "Because you're ready," she whispered. "I can see it now. You're stronger than you think. And I'm tired, so tired. But knowing you'll be okay makes it easier to let go." Her husband lowered his forehead to her hand, sobbing quietly, not out of despair, but out of acceptance. The patient reached out to all of us with her final bit of strength. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me finally be honest." The room grew unbearably still, the kind of stillness that holds meaning, not emptiness. I stayed with them long after she drifted into sleep. Her truth had finally been said, and in that truth there was peace. The night nurse called me at 5:17 a.m., her voice quiet, respectful, carrying the weight of 100 similar calls, but never sounding routine. I dressed in the dark, drove to the hospital in silence, and walked the familiar hallway toward her room with a heaviness that settled into my bones. Her husband and daughter were sitting beside the bed when I arrived. They weren't speaking, just holding her hands, one on each side, as if keeping her warmth from fading too quickly. When they saw me, they didn't stand. They didn't need to. Grief had a way of pulling them inward, keeping them close to her even after her pulse had gone still. I approached slowly. She looked peaceful, truly peaceful. All the tension that had lived in her shoulders, her jaw, her eyes, it had vanished. She looked lighter, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally slipped away. Her daughter wiped her cheeks, trying to speak through the trembling in her voice. "She waited for us. She didn't want to go alone." I nodded. She held on as long as she could. Her husband looked at me, eyes red but steady. "Doctor, she told us everything yesterday. Thank you for convincing her she didn't have to hide anymore." I shook my head gently. "I didn't convince her. She already wanted to tell you. She just needed permission to stop being strong." He swallowed, gripping her hand tightly. "She was always trying to protect us." "She loved you," I said softly, "more than she feared anything." Silence settled again, tender and fragile. The kind of silence that follows truth, not emptiness. I sat with them for a while, not as a physician giving instructions or updates, but as someone who had walked a part of her journey and felt its weight. Her daughter reached for her notebook, the one she had carried through every appointment, every infusion, every difficult day. Slowly, she opened it to the last blank page. "She told me to write this down," the girl said quietly, "last night." She handed me the notebook. In unsteady handwriting were the words, "Tell them I fought with everything I had, and tell them I wasn't alone." My throat tightened as I handed it back. Those words, they were exactly what she had wanted from the beginning. Not praise, not pity, just truth, her truth. Her husband placed a hand on his daughter's back. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, though his voice cracked. She knew we would be. I stood and gently covered the patient's hands beneath the blanket. It was a small gesture, one I had done countless times, but this time it felt like closing the last chapter of a book I didn't want to end. Before leaving the room, I turned to them one last time. "I'll make sure everyone remembers her the way she wanted," I said, "not for her illness, but for her courage." Her daughter nodded. "She was brave, wasn't she?" "In every way that matters," I replied. When I walked back into the hallway, the world outside was just beginning to brighten. Nurses moved with quiet purpose, carts rolled softly across the floor, and life continued, as it always does, even when our hearts are still. But something about that morning felt different. Her story stayed with me. Her honesty, her fear, her strength, her love. And the moment she asked me to hold her truth for the people she cherished, that moment became a part of me. As doctors, we often forget that we carry pieces of our patients long after their battles end, but she made sure I'd never forget hers. The sunrise outside the window glowed a soft, muted gold, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself stop, breathe, and feel the weight of everything she left behind. Not sadness, not despair, but the quiet, enduring imprint of a life that fought to the very last breath, with honesty, with love, and with everything she had.